with Chizito, of course, talking about the concept of money a little bit more, and in terms of what cryptocurrency has to offer. Is it offering solutions or even more problems when it comes to money? Council, when we went into the break, we're still breaking down how really cryptocurrency influences, governments, and how actually the problems we are seeing of inflation could maybe not have just been created by the Russia-Ukrainian war. After the increase of the Federal Bank...
Federal Reserve.
Yeah, Federal Reserve.
Central Bank of the US.
Yes, their rate. Very many banks across the globe increased interest rates as well. And of course, it affected as investors also started pulling out money from cryptocurrency to liquidate due to uncertainties that could surround cryptocurrencies. Do you think also this contributed to actually the global rise in prices, the inflation that we are seeing, or it was actually a response due to inflation?
I think the crypto liquidation, from liquidating crypto to fiat money to do stuff, was a reaction. I think, inflation makes a unit of a currency less valuable each day that passes by. The more the inflation, the less valuable the unit. For example, say that inflation is a hidden tax on the middle class. People don't live off assets. If you live off a paycheck, it will be worth less if inflation goes up. I think it was a reaction to the inflation, which inflation was caused by a combination of factors. It has been building over time. This inflation did not happen because Russia woke up in the morning and invaded Ukraine. Otherwise, we would have seen inflation when the US invaded Pakistan, invaded
Libya.
We would have seen it. But even when the Russians control oil production, gas, and even the corn production, that alone did not tantamount to the rapid almost runaway inflation we even see. It's a combination of majorly three factors, and people are not looking at it in this way. It's a combination of three, not one fact only contribute to the inflation. Number one, you had lockdowns in 2020, and those lockdowns forced major producers of any commodity to cut down on production because the demand was literally low. There's no need to produce fuel at the time because people were under lockdown, and that's why you saw that the futures contracts, I think, on the major commodity exchanges like the West Texas Intermediary on the US, they say trading in negatives. Why? Because they realized that there was no need to actually put cars on the road when you're in lockdown. So they cut down production, OPEC and all major producing countries. That production coincided in the fact when the US Congress, the UK did what you call monetary financing, almost similar to quantitative easing, what the US did. The UK and major economies, Japan, China, Canada. In fact, the other day I was listening to a parliamentary clip of a major legislator in Canada was saying these guys went to the central bank and borrowed from the central bank. In other words, the Canadian central bank printed money to give these guys to spend. But what you saw after the lockdowns, after cutting of production of major goods, you saw increase of an M2 money supply, the money supply generally in major economies that issue hard currency. Why people were not working, they couldn't raise taxes, so they went and borrowed from their banks. When you borrow from a bank, what do? The Federal Reserve went and bought certain financial assets and printed new money to buy them. Electronically printed money to buy them. So once when you look at the assets, the balance sheets of central banks, the assets now they have that they are bought with printed money, the assets have actually gone up. The curve is going. Before COVID, the balance sheet of the US was 4 trillion. They printed 4 trillion. Now, when you go there now, it's about 7 trillion. The UK, similarly. China, People's Central Bank, you look, the trend is the same. You go to Japan, that is the trend. And anyone who follows those balance sheets should actually see them and realize what is happening. Now, that printing of money, because the US passed the CARES Act, 2.2 trillion, to cater for unemployment benefits. The UK had a fallow scheme where they did monetary financing. Go borrow from the central bank prints money and gives government to spend on people. That coincides with cutting production of goods and services, more money. What it means, more money chases fewer goods. And production did not catch up fast enough. Of course, and then along the way, you have a Russian war, which slows down how much production can come up. Because like I told you, Russia controls, I think they're the third biggest exporter of oil. But not the biggest, but they're the third. They control most of the gas that goes to Western Europe. Russia and Ukraine together control 25% of the global wheat and corn production. When you have a war, in other words, you even limit how much they can produce of that.
Yeah.
But the problem had already started in 2020. What we're experiencing now is a combination of three factors I've mentioned. Too much money chasing too good was printed to provide for unemployment benefits in the Western world. A dip in production, in production of goods because of the lockdowns, and then you have a war, which actually slows down how much of that production can catch up with the money printed in certain goods like corn and wheat, and maybe oil to an extent, because OPEC has not yet reached the oil production they were at pre-COVID, but there are more dollars asking for oil than what you expect. And then in Uganda here, you had a problem that was unique to us. You had the currency, the shilling has started depreciating against the dollar. At some point the other week, I think it even reached 3,800. Yeah. Until the central bank intervened. And most countries in Africa, are suffering that. But I think in Africa, yes, it's a response to what I've told you, the inflation. But I think in Africa and Uganda particularly, I think some people, bureaus, because forex bureaus are like money shops. I think they hoarded some dollars. I think because now that the US printed so much money, now the policy is how can we cut down on inflation? Well, they call it quantitative tightening. Like withdraw that money you have put so that you cut down on the inflation. Now, once anyone who is a foreign market currency player realizes that the central bank in the US is now looking at quantitative tightening, he automatically thinks that in his economy dollars might be scarce. So what does he do? He hoards some of the currency. And then he hopes that it will go up, and then he speculates that if we hide these dollars, the dollar will go up, and then we shall get shillings and we shall be in business. Because our foreign markets now, currency markets in Uganda have, I think, three players. You have the central banks, then you have the commercial banks that trade against themselves, you have the forex bureaus that act as money shops, then you have the central bank. There are three. So someone out there could have hoarded either the money shops, the forex bureaus, or the banks. I don't think the central bank will have an incentive to hold the dollars because it works against, but you never know. So whatever is happening in Uganda is a response to what is happening internationally. So some unscrupulous can say, and Kasita were saying the other day that they believe dollars are being hoarded. They could be right. Yeah. So the concept of money, as we are going forward with life, because we don't know how long the world will be around, it is not always going to be what we are seeing today. And with the merging of technologies where you have big tech players like Amazon, like Facebook, and if, for instance, Amazon controls world trade by 40% or 30%, I am seeing in Mexico, I think Mexico, Amazon is introducing its kind of token that you can trade on its platform. So people may not have an urgency to spend fiat money or government money on those platforms. So the revolution of money is ongoing. Bitcoin has just opened the gates. But it is by itself, it's not going to replace any currency. No, it's not. But it is like the revolution of how people think of money. What is money? You mean what gives money is, because like I've given you a simple history. At some point, dollars had value because they were backed by gold, according to the Bretton Woods Agreement. $35 for an ounce of gold. That system was changed because the Americans were paying so much money, and the other economies felt that they don't have the dollars to redeem all the gold. All the dollars cannot redeem the few little gold they have. So some countries like France, by 67 started saying, no, give us our gold now, we don't want your paper. Money by its, I think it was Voltaire who said that fiat money, paper money, eventually returns to its intrinsic value, which is zero. If you look at the history of the world, fiat money always goes away. For instance, the Germans had the Deutschmark at some point. Do you ever still hear it? Yeah. So if you have Deutschmarks now, what will they do for you? the French had francs. Now they're all replaced by dollars. So money now has value because government says it has value. Definitely. Because we believe, but not because it has intrinsic value. You can see commodity money. The risk with that kind of money is that in the very long run, either politics changes that money, and you see again, we had the East African shilling. Is it still around? You now have shillings. It will not. It won't come back. I do not believe that East Africa Currency Union is a reality. I don't believe so.
Kadaga was in Kinshasa, actually.
That is political posturing. I actually do not believe, and I'm going to be on record by saying, I bet that we shall ever see the East African currency in our lifetime. I bet. You see, there is a reason why in the European Union, for you to join the Union, they emphasize that culturally, we should all be the same. Like, we should be a democracy. Our values should. You cannot have in Uganda a system that the political system that the way it is. Kenya, they have a political system, and Tanzania, they have and money, issuing money is a function of politics.
Definitely.
Now, if the politics is dysfunctional, I absolutely guarantee you there will be bilateral agreements that will never see the light of day. Trust me. But of course, now this is what they have to say. At some point, the East African Union will come when maybe we have had a major crisis. But it is not going to happen because people have negotiated. So why the value system across the East African community is fundamentally different. And until the value system is, why did the East African Currency Union break apart in 1967? Because of differences in value systems. The British left some things that could unite us, but along the way, Amin came a dictatorship. Kenya became too capitalist. Tanzania became socialist. There are the three fundamentals. Now, if you have those value systems, how would you even agree on the monetary policy? The central bank, would it? Because much as you may argue that the central bank is detached from the politics legally world over, these people are appointed by a politician and they serve the interests of the appointing authorities. So if you do not harmonize in the East African community fundamental values, a value system, that's why you see the European Union where the currencies has worked. They will only admit you to the European Union if you have the value system. They don't want a dictatorship in the European Union.
Britain didn't have qualified for the value
No,
system.
they refused. If you look at the history why Great Britain refused, they just didn't want to take on the euro. It was a cautious decision not to. At some point, when you look, I think the euro came in 2000. If you look at the negotiations surrounding that are coming into the first of the euro, the British never had any incentive to ditch the pound for the euro. They'd never. They just exploit the trade opportunities of the EU. But not, and you think, okay, if you look at the value system in the UK, it's not different, but it was designed not to. But if you look at all countries that use the euro, fundamentally, they have the value system is the same across the board. Yes, the discrepancy is there, but the fundamentals. But for us, we're not yet agreeing on the fundamentals. And that explains why even the currency union in 1967 broke apart. 71, 67, I think, around there. Amin comes into power, does his own thing. In Tanzania, socialist does his own. So if you have discrepancies in policy, and again, that's even why the euro is not even as successful as it ought to have been. Because much as they have fundamental values, it does not have a political, there's something lacking about the political backing of it. Much as the euro is a strong currency, I think it's the second biggest reserve currency, it won't trap the dollar though. The Chinese, I don't think, and people, when you have a currency crisis, a global currency crisis, which might not come. I do not think the world will just replace the dollar as a major reserve currency with another fiat currency. That's why now the arguments comes in of why should governments always issue the money? If you look at how money has transformed over time, I've told you, people had gold and the small communities agreed on a third intermediary good that they would exchange. Along the way, you have big merchants who help people not to, because of security reasons, people didn't want to carry around heavy sacks of gold. So they deposit the gold with the goldsmiths, and the goldsmith issued them the paper represented, I have your gold, but this is the paper. Now what happened is that this paper started being divided into subunits, and it gained the value of its own. What happened? The goldsmiths got an incentive to issue more paper than there was gold. That's why you have to see certain countries have what you call a fractional, legally it's called a fractional reserve banking system, where for the deposits you should have should be a certain percentage of the money you issue in loans. It shouldn't be 100%. For instance, there are some point where the deposits you have are what you should lend out. The Western Europe, and in fact in the US, though the US they remove the reserve requirements. And again it explains the inflation we're going right now. But reserve requirement means that you don't need to have money in a reserve somewhere for you to issue loans. In other words, you can issue money by just typing numbers in a screen somewhere and lending that person money, provided you have certain money that you can redeem. It doesn't have to be exact. The total amount of money you lend out, that it should not be equivalent to what exactly you have. It shouldn't be 100%, 1-to-1 ratio.
Reserve, yes.
So it should be a fraction of having. So that fraction, that's what the goldsmiths started doing in the the Middle Ages. The Medici were doing it actually. That's why they got so much power. So once they started getting all that money, and they realized that people are not redeeming their papers with gold immediately, they started actually issuing more papers than the gold they had. That's what you call a fractional banking system. So money, now that, with time, people say getting papers were backed with gold. I think at some point the economy of Switzerland actually collapsed. I think in the early 1600s, collapsed because people realized there are too many note papers, and all those papers could not be committed to the gold that is in circulation. So there was a run on goldsmiths, and they didn't have all the money. So the economy collapsed. So after that, now they went back to the system. The central banks such as a new phenomenon. Central banks actually, the first central bank in the world, they think the Swedish British, 1690 something, 700 years, 1690 something, 500 years, around 500 years old. It's not as old. Now, if you look at some economies, even the British alone, certain banks could issue their own banknotes to back the gold that were in reserves, and those goldsmiths you could use this. Now the pound comes in the 1600s. What happened is that each bank that was given a chance to get pounds was bought out by the government, and all its notes were out of circulation. So the money now government-controlled money that is not backed by anything is a really new phenomenon. So in 1971, 1973, because I've even told you our shilling in 1966 to 71, when the world was still on the gold standard, was backed by a certain ounce of gold. When the US ditched the system and they said they will not be redeeming that gold, now our shilling was backed by the dollar. When the dollar got instability in the 70s, we now went back. We were now said, for some years we pegged our currency to the IMF. They don't call it a currency, but it's a currency called special drawing rights for about 5 years. Then we again went back to the dollar. So right now what you could say is a petrodollar standard. So how far that will go, no one knows. I can't sit here and tell you that the world is going to collapse, the dollar. No. But I don't think the way we perceive money today, with even the emerging technologies, will certainly be the same 50 years from now.
Yeah.
And governments are going to be in the marketplace. The days where the issuer of currency was synonymous with the government, and that monopoly of government issuing money could be undergoing a revolution.
Yeah.
Certainly. And the Bitcoin folks or the Bitcoin pundits are just opening up the gates. But they are certainly not going to replace Bitcoin. Will never be a currency.
Yeah. We're going to go into another short break. When we return, we talk about the currency of Uganda in particular. We have our own currency, what do they call it? Printing machine coming up. That they are saying that this will help probably solve the issue of value for the currency being so fluctuating and so on. But we'll be talking about that as well, and also some of the things we talked about last time concerning cheaper cash and how far they have gone with their ruling. Yes, ruling against cheaper cash and so on. Our dear viewer, thank you for staying tuned. We're getting into a short breather. We'll come back with our final segment for the show. Don't go anywhere.